This is the Brandon Smith Show, and I'm your host, Brandon Smith. And the entire purpose of the show is one singular thing, and that is to help you live a life that much more free from dysfunction. So today is one of our leadership therapy shows, and joining me on our leadership therapy shows is always
co-host,
my wonderful, amazing, incredible, talented producer and co-host for these segments.
How come you only do this when the cameras are on?
That's not true. Everyone here sees what I
it is.
do, and here's what I do. So there's evidence that I do this. Whitney Mendoza, folks, round of applause. Golf clap for Whitney. So for our topic today, Whitney,
Yes.
and Isaac had offered this
Tell
up
me.
A couple weeks ago.
He
and
did.
We just haven't had
We're
time to
giving him
get to it.
credit.
So we're getting to this. We're going to talk about common topic in the workplace is generational differences. So we're going to talk about managing a team of millennials. So we're going to talk about what are the 4 ways to do that.
What are those?
So that's what the show's about today.
Millennials.
Oh, millennials.
Mm-hmm. We're going to talk about that.
Yeah, so millennials would be roughly, I don't have the exact ages in front of me, the demographic, so it's right around kind of 24, 25. Gen Z is right below them. And then it tips up to about kind of 36-ish, 37-ish.
Nice.
I could be slightly off on those, but it's right around that window. Okay, so we're really kind of looking at late 20s, mid to late 20s right now. How old are you?
Yep, I knew it was coming.
Yeah.
I'm a millennial.
Yeah.
I'm a millennial.
Yeah. But you actually said something really interesting that we're going to talk about in
Did
the
I?
show. You said,
Oh, I did.
You said, am I a millennial? And I think one of the things that we're going to talk about when we get into this topic is of all the generations that I've ever encountered or worked with or seen, it's probably one of the most diverse in terms of different personalities and maturity.
Agreed.
So you could take a prior generation because everyone kind of went more lockstep through life and experiences, and maturity levels can be pretty tightly bound. With this particular generation, you've got a bigger, wider range. You got some folks that are super mature, and fully grown adults, and then you got folks that are not mature and not fully grown adults. So as managers, that's what you get. Hey, it's like when my kids were in preschool, and their preschool teachers used to say, "You get what you get, and you don't pitch a fit." Well, this is kind of what you get. You're kind of dealt this hand of varying maturity levels. So we're going to jam on that. But before we jam on that, you have told me you have a dysfunction of the week story for me.
And I didn't tell you what it was because
No, you didn't.
I'm turning the tables today.
Yeah,
Usually I'm the one in the dark.
Well, I like it that way.
I know you do.
It's more fun.
That's why it's not that way right now.
Oh, okay. Well, hit us. What is happening in the workplace world of dysfunction this week?
This is why I picked this one. It's entitled, "Excuse Me Why I Spit on the Office Floor."
This sounds
right.
Sounds great.
It's
already.
good.
I was about to say juicy, but that would be a little bit too punny. I don't think that's exactly where I want to go with that. Okay.
A secretary who worked for a research scientist in Decatur, Georgia, told us via email that she should have known she was in for trouble when she went in for her interview.
Okay.
The boss suddenly jumped up and ran out of the interview, stating he had to wash his hands because he had failed to do that after touching cadaver parts while doing research in the lab. Hope you just didn't eat something. He even asked her to wash her hands too, since they had shaken hands. Yeah.
Well, this just sounds like good hygiene to me.
Oh, okay.
Because that's what I do whenever I touch cadaver parts.
Okay, Brandon, no.
I do that. No, I just say, oh, I'm so sorry. You should wash your hands because I was just touching, dead animals in the parking lot.
She ended up taking the job, but the unsanitary activities continued.
She took the job.
This is where it gets good.
Oh, it gets good. I'm sorry.
That you thought that first part was good.
You had me at took the job, actually. I thought that was the end of the story. But keep going, please.
The boss also spat on her office floor.
Spat.
Patuh.
Patui.
On her office floor one day when he again did not wash his hands and had touched his mouth. He had also been known to type on her keyboard with bloody hands.
Oh, that's to me, that's where it really gets good. I almost said juicy again, but this is just
God.
this doesn't fit well with this story.
She eventually reported the boss to HR for these, among other reasons, and was transferred to another role in the organization.
So she was transferred.
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah,
I'm not sure what happened with Bloody
That's
Hand
the best
Man.
part about all this. Is that just oh you're complaining? Oh well, let's just move you. We'll move you because we'll keep our Dr. Frankenstein over there. And
can we get some hand sanitizer?
that would have been a better title for this. Is Dr. Frankenstein kind of thing? Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of. I mean, I don't know. It just kind of get this whole like. I picture this kind of mad scientist kind of guy running around, dead parts, blood, spitting.
So what would you have done, Brandon? Hi, I just touched cadaver parts. Oh, excuse me. And now your hands are contaminated too. Welcome to the job.
If I took the job?
Well, would you have? Or would you have been like, no, thank you?
Was I doing research on workplace dysfunction? Then I probably would have taken the job.
Well, it was a
But
sure,
if I was
sure
really
sign.
looking for a healthy work environment, and I had an aversion to cadaver parts,
maybe you just forgot.
maybe he did. But I think if I was then in her role, I would be putting signs up all over the place.
Employees,
to be like, hey, remember everybody,
wash
wash your hands.
Yeah.
If you just touched a cadaver part, wash your hands. No blood on keyboards. No blood. No spitting. No spitting in the office. Yeah. Okay. So, in case there was any confusion you might have that the world is a messy place, reassurance. Yeah. Yeah. I'm rolling with the puns today.
Very punny.
Very punny. Very punny. I'm always punny. Okay.
Millennials.
Millennials.
We're talking about millennials.
Yeah, so
today.
we're going to dig into the whole 4 things to do to manage millennial teams better. And some of this stuff will be stuff you've heard before. I'm going to give you a slightly different spin on it because I think that's important. So to do this right, this conversation right, I'm checking my time because I want to make sure that I give us ample time. We are doing a history lesson today.
Oh, okay.
Whitney. She's so excited.
I'm always put on the spot.
Here's the problem. Well, no,
so
it's just,
difficult.
Actually, I wasn't going to quiz you, but now I'm going to do this because I just love to quiz Whitney. It is so much fun, folks. It is so much fun. So here's the deal. People talk about millennials and they just say, oh, millennials. They complain about right here and right now. They complain about millennials. That's the common mantra. You cannot study and look at a generation without not first looking back and examining history. I think I used not twice there. I probably shouldn't have. But you got to go back in history and really to understand any kind of generation. So we're going all the way back to the end of World War II.
Okay.
World War II. Even Isaac's like, wow, really? That far? Yes, that far back. So after World War II, we're talking about American millennials. I think that's an important distinction because while there's going to be very different flavors around the globe, we're really talking about American millennials. So this history lesson is going to be a little more relevant. So World War II ends. American soldiers come back, primarily male soldiers, okay? And there's a tremendous amount of research on kind of studying a lot of that post-traumatic stress disorder that they experienced, but there wasn't treatment for that. So what you ended up getting is then they all came back, got married, and started having babies. And what do we call that generation that they had?
The baby boomers.
Yes! Hooray, she got it. So they have all these kids, baby boomers, huge generation. I mean, huge generation. So when we look at the generations, the baby boomers is a tremendously huge population. It's gotten a lot of attention all the way throughout the years. So these parents, primarily fathers of the baby boomers, were somewhat disconnected, focused very much on work, not very emotionally engaged, didn't go to sporting activities, didn't go to watch their kids play, and were just kind of the grumpy, get off my lawn types of dads. Okay, that's the male parents that the baby boomers grew up with. Important. Okay, so if you grew up with a parent like that, what would you then say to yourself about how you want to raise your kids?
Are we going to talk about Woodstock? Free love.
Well, we're getting there. We haven't gotten to the 60s yet.
Okay.
We're still squarely in the 50s.
So you kind of want to do the opposite, correct?
Yeah,
like
you
a little
would
bit more
say-
freedom.
You'd say, I want my parents to show up.
Yeah.
I'm going to show up to my kids' games because my parents never do. They don't care. I'm going to sit down and have conversations with my kids. I'm going to see how they're doing. I'm going to try to emotionally connect because my parents don't. Now, it's not their parents' fault. It's primarily because they were very role focused. They had very traditional roles. The woman and the man had very traditional roles, and the man was very disconnected because of World War II primarily. Okay, a lot of research around this. So then we rebel, and we're in the 1960s. So then what do the baby boomers do? You just said it earlier.
Oh, yeah, I get Woodstock.
Woodstock,
Free love.
Hippies. We're gonna save the world, right? We're gonna green. Everything's right. Okay.
Volkswagen.
So we're hearing echoes of the millennial generation now. Okay.
Oh, I had never thought of it that way.
Really?
No.
I'm teaching today.
I don't really,
I'm
think
teaching.
about the 60s much.
Well, I know.
Probably 'cause I
some
wasn't
of us
born
weren't
then.
there, but that's why so the foundation for the wiring comes from history. So then we get these people that go through this. The world should be, free love and green and more emotional and connected. Boomers abandoned all those ideals, okay, and went in and became yuppies and became kind of big money earners in the 80s and 90s, okay, and bought big houses and created tons of wealth for themselves. I'm being a little cynical here, but they did. But then they said, we're going to raise our kids differently. So how do you think then they played that out? What did that look like? You hinted at it earlier.
The no rules, connection.
Somewhat of that. You're not rigid. They're not going to be the grumpy disciplinarian, right? They're going to show up to all the games and sporting events and music recitals, and they're going to have conversations with their kids and be super connected, and they want to be their kids' best friends. Okay, so one could argue that the boomers' relationship with the millennials is one of the closest relationships of any generation, from parent to child, in terms of intimacy and connection. Okay. Yeah, go on.
No, I was going to say, is that why too? I'm sure you're going to get into this, but we also, another stat, if you will, that you hear a lot about is 20-somethings living in the basement.
Yep.
Of their parents' house.
Yeah. See, so now we're not quite there yet. We're getting
Okay.
close. We're in the 90s.
Okay.
We're in like Saved by the Bell and
Backstreet's back.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we've moved ourselves in squarely into the 90s. We kind of skipped the 80s a little bit, but we moved into the 90s, and that's kind of what's going on in terms of raising these kids. Okay. Now I'm getting close to time, so we're going to call a break here. But the next part of our story. So this is all important history lesson, folks, because this is going to set us up on how do you manage millennials, because understanding is the first step. So the next part of the story is we're going to talk about millennials applying to college.
I'm learning so much about myself.
And the influence that boomers had in that whole process and how they rewrote the college application. Not necessarily for the better. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Hey everyone, this is Brandon. I hope your 2018 is everything you'd hoped it would be. That said, we could all use a tune-up. Go to my site, theworkplacetherapist.com, www.theworkplacetherapist, all one word, .com, for a library of resources for you. You can find past shows, blog posts on navigating workplace dysfunction, and even my TED Talk on the contagiousness of emotions in the workplace. And that's not all. There are the Workplace Happiness Workbooks to help you find happiness in your job, and even a tab to Ask the Therapist, where you can ask me anything on your mind. We all need a tune-up once in a while. Get yours today. This is the Brandon Smith Show. Welcome back from break. If you're just now joining us, which I'm sure you're not, we've been talking about millennials. And primarily our topic today that Whitney and I are taking on is how do we effectively manage millennials? What are the kind of 4 ways to effectively do that? But to get there, we've been doing a history lesson. So we started already with the history of the boomers and kind of their parents and how that formed them and how they think about raising kids. And then we walked all the way up through the 80s and 90s. And now the millennials are applying to college. Okay. Now they're applying to college. Okay. So remember I mentioned the boomer generation is a very big generation, huge generation.
Yes.
Okay. And one of the hallmarks to that generation, which is kind of why I hinted at this earlier, I said they kind of abandoned their kind of hippie, free love, let's all get along kind of roots and became ultra competitive. And that was kind of this push for making more money and earning potential and really competed. That's why often you see a lot of the big trophy houses. Trophy houses, that is kind of a phenomenon that really came out of the boomer generation. Okay. That ultra competitiveness then fueled how they raised their kids and thought about college. So rather than thinking about college as, okay, you're going to go to college, you're going to get a great degree, it was you have to get into the best college.
Mm-hmm.
And so it changed how they thought about the college application. So before the millennial generation, college application was generally dictated by a few things: your SAT score, your undergraduate GPA, some other activities that you were involved in. Those were the main drivers, and then your college essays. Okay. The boomer generation then made SAT and GPA still there, but they made those volunteer activities a focal point. And so this is where we get into the helicopter parenting thing and the overscheduling. They overscheduled their kids for a one singular reason, and that is to get into the best school. So they made sure that they were training for the Olympics by age 5, and they were immediately doing volunteer activities by age 10, and they were overly involved in everything. Okay, so that is an important element to this whole story, because what ended up, so if you were targeting college and all those things were getting put on your plate, what would you not be doing? And this is a tough question. What would you not be doing?
Working.
At age, yes. Ding, 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 ding. Right out of the gate, folks, she wins again. You're not working. You're not getting a job. First generation in this country did not have jobs at 15, 16, 17. Now, this is where that breakdown in maturity level varies.
Yeah, because I was working.
Exactly. That's why you said, am I a millennial?
Yeah.
Okay. So what if you start working like every other prior generation, and you're working fast food, and you're working, mowing lawns, and you're working in retail, and you're working in grocery stores, and you're doing these minimum wage jobs, which every other generation before did. Okay. Not this generation, because that was a waste of time. That doesn't look good on a college application. So they cut it out and they made it an artificial growth experience. So they were kind of raised in a bubble. A percentage of millennials, the ones that managers talk about having a hard time with. So there's a guy named Tim Elmore, kind of a famous guru in this space. And when he asked deans around the country, he said, about millennials, they said 26 is the new 18. So they essentially said there's an 8-year gap.
Wow.
On maturity level. So while this generation's super smart and super able to use technology, maturity level is off. Because there was two things they didn't do at 15 and 16. They didn't work, they didn't date. They don't start doing that till 23.
Wow.
23, 24. So what is 24 minus 16? Math.
Yep, no.
What history to math right there.
I got everything else, but not math.
24 minus 16 is? No. 24 minus 16.
5, 6, 7, 8.
8 years.
Thank you.
So this whole thing that those deans were saying was, we have a maturity gap of 8 years. And you can directly tie it to when people start dating, which is a whole, how do I build this kind of relationship?
Yeah.
And when people start working. So then you have someone who doesn't have relational maturity or work maturity walking in to work for you at 23 or 24. So those 24-year-olds are really 16, unless they've had work experience when they were in their teenage years.
Wow.
That's where the breakdown's happening, folks.
Well,
and it's not their fault. It's because their parents were so competitive to get them into college that they overscheduled and took out these natural things that we all grew as people in our teenage years. They eliminated it from their life experience.
I feel like the pendulum is going to swing back the other way.
It is. Actually, what you're seeing now in college applications, since my daughter Abby, if you all have been following the show, she's already been on twice, they're actually looking for work experience.
Yeah.
On college applications now. So they've learned that not having work experience correlates to low maturity. We don't want that from one of our students.
Yeah.
And so it's hit the other way. But again, boomers completely rewrote that college application process, and in a way that it did not benefit millennials. So you end up with this gap. Now, like I said, huge range in maturity on that generation. So what I have seen outside of early work experience, so that's a good thing for you as your hiring manager. If you want to kind of assess maturity, quickly interview someone and say, hey, tell me about your first job. If they say, well, gosh, I was working at 15 years old or 16 and I worked at, McDonald's or some fast food place or whatever, you're going to have a higher probability that this person's going to already have figured out the norms of a workplace versus someone who says, no, this is it. This is my, well, are you talking about my volunteer experiences? Which is a whole different ballgame. Okay. So I think that's something that managers can do right out of the gate. If they haven't had work experience, so this is, again, ties into some of the challenges managers have. And then we'll go into my tips here in a minute because we still got time, right? Because my history lessons run a little long today.
I'm learning so much about myself, though. This is great.
But we're going to talk about you because you haven't had that experience that I shared in terms of typical.
Non-working?
Yes.
Yeah.
That was not your experience.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah, I was working. In fact, we were just talking. I held the same retail position all through high school and college, which you don't really hear. That's another character trait, if you will, of millennials that you hear a lot about is what's this, the statistic that they stay in one job for 3 years?
I would say that's long, 3 years.
Yeah, probably less than that.
I would argue it's closer to 2.
Yeah. So I'm kind of opposite of that.
Yeah.
Too.
Different experience, right?
Yeah.
And you might not have had an experience where you had two parents kind of hovering over you, scheduling everything.
Yeah.
Right. So okay. Millennials now walked in the door. They're working for you. If they haven't had that prior work experience, it matters because they have. We use kind of cognitive psychology as part of our history lesson. Cognitive psychology says the world's really messy. We can't process all the messiness, so we put things into schemas, boxes, so we know how to make sense of it. So the box that they put you in as a manager, they only have a few boxes. They know parent, so they can call you. So you're like. So this is where we have to see this phenomenon that pops up. It always happened in this generation where if they love a boss, I've heard millennials refer to them as their work mom or their work dad. And it's a compliment.
Very interesting.
It's like, oh, you spend all this time with me and you nurture me and it's like, you're like my mom. You're my work mom. I'll tell you about my date I had this weekend, right? It's a little, for some people, it's really creepy, okay? But they're not doing it to be creepy. They're doing it because it's a compliment. That's a schema. So parent, volunteer coordinator. If you're a volunteer coordinator, that's a bad seat to sit in. You don't want that, but that may be how they view you, which is, oh, well, at any point I can, I don't have to come in. Like, because as a volunteer, I'm in charge. It's why we see millennials say, no, I can't make that meeting. I've already got, I've got a Pure Barre class that I've already paid for that. I'm going to Pure Barre.
Yeah.
Right. Soul Cycle. I'm sorry, I can't make it. Okay. And the manager's like, what? This is a major client. What are you talking about? They're like, no, I'm sorry. We've got yoga. Okay. And it goes on and on, folks. Okay. So there's that one. And then the third one is teacher. Okay. Teacher is the other kind of schema. And then teacher is, of course, I can always call my parent and overrule the teacher. That's when you see the parents show up at the interviews or call on behalf of their millennial because they didn't like the performance review. Not good. Okay. Okay. So what can you do to do this, to manage this generation well? So I'm going to hold aside the folks that I've kind of listed as maybe not quite where they need to be. There's some amazing things about this generation that if we just make a few little tweaks, you can unlock all their potential and make a huge difference.
Okay. And
so the first thing I would say is, so we've got 4 here. So the first one I would say is clear expectations. Clear expectations is and they ask for this, and we hear talk about purpose. I want to know that there's purpose in my job. What they're really asking for here is, I want to know exactly what's expected. What am I supposed to be doing? Why am I doing it? And folks, that is a very reasonable expectation. As a manager, if you're not doing that, you're not doing your job. You should be doing that. And it's not unfair for them to ask that. I want to know kind of what am I supposed to be doing and what's the path?
Yeah. What's my purpose here?
What's my purpose here and what's my path? They like to know the path. Now, we know today in the workplace, paths have gotten really messy. It's not a career ladder. It's more of a career lattice. So, but that's okay. Spend time with them on that. Don't shy away from it. Don't make up stuff. Just be direct and honest. Hey, there isn't really a ladder, but let's talk about a lattice. Let's talk about how to set you up for the next opportunity, whether that's here or somewhere else. So clear expectations is one. Okay, that's the first one. Second, flexibility. Provide these folks flexibility. Don't be so old school to say you got to come in and work in the office from 8 to 5, and the first person in is the one who gets all the props, and the last person in, we're going to, label her bad, whatever. That's silliness. Just focus on what the work needs to get done and give them flexibility to do it on their own schedule.
Yeah.
This is a creative bunch. They don't need a lot of oversight. Give them that flexibility. Okay. So they want to work at a coffee shop, let them work at a coffee shop. They don't have to be in the office. Now, there's some times when you may say, no, we all need to come together to talk. And that's fine, but don't make it rigid. So flexible in terms of that work environment. The third of my fourth is often not talked about enough, and it's embrace uniqueness. So particularly as this generation drops more into the 20s, they really want their uniqueness, who they are uniquely, to be known and celebrated. They don't want to conform. Now, that causes some issues because there's still some level of conformity. But I was doing a session for a group of 40-plus-year-olds, and they were talking about they're in a technology company. They were talking about the millennials in their company. And one of the guys said to me, or in the session, he said, when I grew up, he was an African-American guy, and he said, when I grew up, diversity was all about figuring out your differences and then figuring out what was similar and then really leverage the commonalities. Try and find ways to be more common, more similar. He said, now it's like figure out your differences and then make those really profound so you show people how much more different you are from them. Be more divisive rather than inclusive, ironically enough. So it's really important that you spend time and get to know what their differences are and you honor that. And then that may mean even dress code. Be flexible on dress code. Understand those differences. That's going to be really an important strength for you as a manager, which means you got to pour more time into them. And the last thing I would offer is the regular feedback. Regular feedback, having those regular meetings. And regular is whatever you dictate. Just be consistent. That could be every week, every other week, but spend time to talk about what are they learning, what could they be doing differently, giving them feedback, and helping them kind of grow along the way.
Yeah.
So I raced to the finish line on all that, Whitney, and I didn't even give you a time to even comment. What do you, any thoughts you have from that list that I threw out?
I agree. And I think if you utilize this list, you have to leverage it in the right way, right? Like, the creativity, I mean, that's another thing. If you're saying be flexible and let them express the best way they work, that's how you're also going to get the most out of them, right? Like if they're very creative minded, if you foster that and you put them in that position, then that's where you're going to reap what they can do for you. So
totally.
If they're creative, put them in a creative position. If they're very methodical and scheduled, then that's where they should be. Don't try to fit them and the square into the round hole.
May I say
Totally.
something?
Yeah.
So how do you, as a millennial, or how does the marketplace millennial fit? Because there's a lot of companies that work with older markets, and having millennial teams. How does that relationship work? Do the millennials have to change, or does the marketplace have to adapt?
Yeah. So Isaac, is a great question. Like, how do they kind of fit intergenerationally? In a perfect world, it would be a little bit of both. So the marketplace does need to adjust to millennials and make these adjustments that I mentioned. But it's also important and imperative for millennials to recognize that their customers may be older and understand their needs and understand their wants and not force them to be more like them.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of coming to the middle from both sides, with the kind of the tiebreaker being whoever the customer is. If the customer's older, then the millennials got to go further. That's just the nature of serving a customer.
Yeah.
And I'd say, we talk about a lot of things about millennials when pushing boundaries. That's true for every generation that's in their 20s. Every generation prior always questions, why do we do it this way? And there's a smarter way to do it. It's just figuring out how do you leverage that and how do you kind of bridge that gap a little bit.
Yeah.
And so you talk about clear expectations, flexibility, embracing uniqueness, and regular feedback. You can sum all that up by saying just spend a little more time. Get to know them a little bit more, and you're going to find that there's so many things that you can unlock. Now, one last thing I will say. If you got a millennial that maybe is lacking maturity, there's a couple things I found that grows people very quickly in life,
Okay.
matures them. One, getting married.
Yeah.
Marriage matures people quickly. So when I deal with, when I would work with the millennial generation, I'll have one group, and they're both the same age, both groups. One group is individual contributors, one group is managers. The managers, the majority of that group's married typically. And it's almost like that. I don't know if it's a chicken or the egg, but there's that, they take on more responsibility, and there's just a different level of maturity. Okay. So marriage, having children can also mature people because of that stress and that change. Military service. So millennials that have military service, they operate more like any other generation that's gone through that. And the last one is under our control as a manager. Have them manage other millennials. About 3 months of managing another millennial will mature a millennial. They'll say, oh my gosh, these people are nuts. And all of a sudden they view things differently.
Yeah.
So those are all ways. By 32, I find millennials are just as mature as any other generation. They kind of catch up. But it's those 20s that is more of a, you get more diversity in terms of maturity level. Unless they've had jobs when they were 16. Then it's not like any other generation.
I'd like to thank my dad for, I'm glad I had a job when I was in high school.
I would end this by saying, if you're a parent and you've got kids that are under still kind of in your house, one of the best gifts you can give them is, this is going to sound horrible, cut out at least one volunteer activity and make them work a job instead. So ditch the volunteer stuff and have them actually work. And
I'd agree
and
with
you may
that.
say, Brandon, that's horrible. They should be volunteering. There's a time and place to do that. But if they don't learn how to actually be self-sufficient, there's no point in teaching them volunteering. In fact, you'll screw up in their brain what work means.
Yeah.
You'll put volunteerism first instead of actually cleaning toilets. That old school working, you want to start there. Okay, I'm way over time. Isaac's like, you got to stop. So thank you for listening. I hope this was helpful to you, and join our fight every single week as we take on that mantle to eliminate workplace dysfunction. Of course, follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Brandon Smith WPT for Workplace Therapist, Twitter @the WP Therapist, iTunes. Most of you are probably listening to this on iTunes. And of course, there's a new show we drop every Sunday, 9:30 p.m. So check it out. And of course, go to my website at theworkplacetherapist.com for more resources to help you have a life that much better. And until our next show, have a great week and an awesome life.